He is a Thunderbird by heart. He received his bachelor's degree here at SUU, although it wasn't called SUU then, was it?
No, it's SUSC.
SUSC at the time. And then he went on to receive his master's and his doctorate from BYU. He has received several education and teaching awards. I was asking him about his awards, and I said, well, what kind of different awards have you received? And he said, all teaching, and that's no surprise because his student evaluations and students through all the years just always talk about Dr. Jones when they come back to campus and how much they love him. He's going to talk to us today about how to decipher between stress and depression, because there is a little difference, and understanding how stress can gain control over us, but how we do have the power within to gain control over it. So without further ado, I present to you Dr. Les Jones. I will.
Thank you, Renee, for that introduction. I want you to know that you've really stressed me out. I'm a little worried. I'm going to be speaking in a funeral tomorrow. Actually, the funeral of someone that some of you know, Vern Kupfer, who hired me in 1969 to be a professor here. What I'm worried about is that with all the stress that I'm experiencing, I might get my talks mixed up. So if it seems like I'm starting to get into a funeral talk, would somebody just maybe try to get me back on track? And hopefully I'll be able to share with you something today that is interesting and worthwhile. A lot of that will depend on you. I'm of course going to do what I do, but there are things that you can do to make what I'm going to talk about more relevant, more practical in your life. You need to take the information that seems important and connect it to your life and to the way you live. I need to know, though, about how long you want me to carry on.
So that we have a good Q&A, we'll leave, you can go until 12:50. So that's about 45 minutes, 40 minutes. Right? What have we got?
12:15?
No, 50.
Oh, 12:50. Okay. I was. Time really flies when you're having fun. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Renee. I've had Renee give you kind of a handout that just in a few words represents a lot of information. Some of it probably won't make much sense to you, but I want to try to build a little structure to begin with, and then connect what I'm going to try to share with you about stress to that structure. Some of it is up here on the whiteboard. I begin a lot of the classes that I teach with what I call the forever question, why do we do the things we do? And that's a very relevant question, I would say, if what we're concerning ourselves with is stress. Why do we feel the stress that we feel? Why do we act in the ways that we act when we experience stressful situations? Why do we think the things that we think? A lot of our stress is actually caused by the thoughts that we have, by how we think about our life, our life situation, other people. So the question is, I hope, an important question, and I would encourage you to wonder about yourself and wonder about people that you care about. Why do we do the things we do? Psychology is defined as the scientific study of the things that we do. And so our behavior, our feelings, our actions, our thoughts, etc., have been studied scientifically. And it seems to me like the evidence that we've accumulated over the years can be expressed in a little model that I've put up here. The things that we do, our behavior, our feelings, our actions, and our thoughts, are a function of an interaction of a lot of different factors. There's not just one switch that turns a particular behavior on and off. It seems like there's an interaction of switches. And actually, the effect of moving one switch depends upon the position of other switches. Sometimes, even in a room, if you flip the switch up, the lights will be on. At other times, if you flip the very same switch down, the lights will be on. It depends upon the position of other switches. So that's what I'm suggesting in this simple model, this simple representation of the scientific answer to the question, why do we do the things we do? This certainly applies, again, to stress, what we're going to be mainly talking about today. There are lots of factors that we need to understand, that we need to put into our lives if we're really going to be successful at managing stress. I've indicated on the handout some more detail than that. I want to just emphasize one thing. Two things, I guess. Under biological factors, we need to realize that genetics is very, very important. A lot of what we do because of the genetic information that is actually replicated in every cell of our body. When we were conceived, our mothers gave us 23 little books full of information and said, if you want to have a life, this is what you're going to have to do. And our dads gave us 23 little books and said, no, this is what you ought to do. Sometimes they tell us about the same thing. Sometimes they give us different instructions. But throughout our life, we continue to be influenced by this innate information, genetics. And so it's important for us to realize that we're not all alike. In some ways we're alike, but in a lot of ways we're different. And we need to factor that in. The counterpart under psychological factors is our experience. A lot of the things that we do because of the experiences that we have. And when we have an experience that really changes our behavior, we call that a learning experience. Learning isn't just what goes on in a classroom. Learning is what goes on constantly in our life. Whenever you have an experience that changes the way you feel or the way you act or the way you think, at least in psychology, we would refer to that as a learning experience. And of course, the thing that we can work with in our own lives, the things that we can learn to manage, the things that we can learn to control, are the things that are mainly a function of learning. What I'm suggesting to you is that a lot of our feelings and our actions and our thoughts are a function of learning. We have learned to be the way we are. And we can learn to be different. We have a tremendous capacity to learn to be the way we want to be. And so that's what I'm going to emphasize with you today. I think I'd better go on. I could elaborate on some of this in more detail. But the main message, again, is what I think is this very optimistic idea that we can learn to be different than we are. Now, to go to maybe the back of your handout and talk more specifically about stress, I've just put down a few ideas here. One of them is a definition of stress: pressure to change, pressure to adjust, pressure to adapt. One of the main sources of stress in our life is frustration. And frustration is what happens, to kind of go back to the front side, when your needs are not being met or your wants are not being realized. That's what we call frustration. We all have needs. And if we haven't learned how to take care of those needs, we experience frustration. We all have wants, and if we can't get the things that we want, we experience frustration. And that frustration acts as a motivation for us to make adjustments. We try to then figure out how to get what we need or how to get what we want, and that's the process of life. It's a process of constant adjustment. Even at a very physiological level, we're constantly adjusting our body temperature, our blood oxygen level. You know, the list just goes on and on. But that basic process of adjustment applies throughout every aspect of our life. And again, this pressure to change is stress. Now, stress, as I suggest here, stress gets a lot of bad press. We think that stress is bad, but it isn't necessarily bad. If you're not experiencing any stress, you're dead. See? Now maybe that's good. But,
Is this part of your funeral?
yeah. Oh, thank you. I knew I was going to get off. Yeah, there I went. Stress is an essential part of our life. One of the leading experts on stress, his name is Hans Selye, differentiated between good stress and bad stress. He called bad stress distress and good stress eustress. So that's an important thing to realize. It isn't living a life where you're stress-free that is the goal. It's figuring out how to manage this important aspect of your life so you have more control over your life. Let me just relate kind of a personal thing to illustrate the last couple of points I've made. When I was a student here, it was College of Southern Utah, and it was a 2-year college at that time. When I finally graduated, we had gone to a 4-year institution, and it was Southern Utah State College. But anyway, when I first started to take classes, when I was a student at this institution, I was terrified to speak in front of people. Fear controlled me. The lowest grade I have on my transcript was in a psychology class where you had to make a presentation in front of the class. I was too frightened to do it. I was prepared, but I couldn't make myself go do it. So I just missed the class and got a low grade because of that. Now, obviously, I'm not like that today. Now, if you'd have asked me back then, I would have told you I was born that way. There's nothing I can do about it. That's just the way I am. One of the most vulgar things a human being can say. That's just the way I am. I took a class, and in that class, I learned that I had learned to be afraid. And I learned that I could learn not to be afraid. And I learned what experiences I would have to overcome this fear that was controlling my life to such an extent. And I simply subjected myself to those experiences so that I could be different. It's very important to understand that. You can be the master of your own fate, probably to a greater degree than you realize. And that should be one of the things that we work toward. being the master of our feelings, the master of our actions, the master of our thoughts. Well, let me illustrate some of these points using, as Renee suggested, one of my favorite objects to teach lessons, and that is balloons. In some ways, I think balloons are like people, or maybe people are like balloons. I've never been able to quite figure out the best way to say that. There are similarities. One of the similarities has to do with sort of how balloons are genetically programmed. Balloons come in different sizes and different shapes and different colors, just like people do. Think how boring the world would be if we were all exactly the same. We're not. We're very different. Balloons have a certain potential. To use the words of, maybe Abraham Maslow, balloons can be self-actualizing. This is not a self-actualizing balloon. This balloon isn't anywhere near the potential that it has. What do I have to do to this balloon so that it can realize its potential? What's the word? I have to stress it. See? I have to put pressure on this balloon to change. And probably, when I put pressure on this balloon to change, it will change. Some people, when you put pressure on them to change, they just change. Some people just adjust. They're very flexible, just like a balloon is. Some people are more like what I've thought of as a Coke bottle. You have to put a lot of pressure on a Coke bottle to get it to change. I've never been able to blow one up. Now, I've seen people do it. They have to put a lot of heat on the Coke bottle, but if they get it hot enough, it'll start to change with just about the same amount of pressure that it takes for this balloon. So here's a balloon now that's starting to realize the potential that it has. Think how important that is. Uh-oh. Sometimes I have balloons that have birth defects. And I thought this one did, but it doesn't. So here's a balloon that's being motivated with a little hot air, just like I'm trying to motivate you. And it's starting to realize its potential as a balloon. Now, let me reinforce one other point. Think how silly it would be for this balloon to try to look like this balloon. Have you ever heard anyone say, I think I'll go on a diet and lose a few inches, I'm too tall for my clothes? Why don't we say that? Why don't we do that? We hear people all the time say, I think I'll go on a diet and try to lose a few inches. I'm too wide for my clothes. Now, of course, there's a little difference. Our goal should be to be healthy, not to be necessarily skinny. See? We have this genetic programming, and we have to live our life within the parameters that we could call biological parameters, especially genetic parameters, people. We need to know ourselves. We need to know what we're able to do, what we're able to accomplish. Well, I'm going to keep motivating this balloon. And of course, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, some of you are starting to anticipate something. What's that?
I'm thinking I sat too close.
I appreciate it, Linda. Thank you for sitting so close. I don't know if you can see Linda's reaction, but as this balloon gets bigger and bigger, she's experiencing more and more stress, right? Now, if I started letting the air out of this balloon, you would start to relax. Now, that's a very important lesson to learn. Sometimes that's what we have to do to manage stress. See? But tell me what's going to happen. No, not yet. Tell me what happens when I do this. What's happening to you, Linda? See, you feel a lot more relaxed. How about you guys? How are you feeling compared to when I was there? See, the closer we are to an event, the more effect it has on us. The further away we are from an event, the less effect it has. When do my students study for the test? 2 or 3 weeks before? Very few of them. Now, actually, if your motivation is positive, it kicks in a lot sooner than if it's negative. If you study to get good grades, you study for a lot longer time than if you study to avoid bad grades. If you go to church, so you'll go to heaven. You go to church a lot sooner than if you go to church so you won't go to hell. It makes a difference. What is motivating? Where's the pressure coming from? Is it kind of a pull or a push? Important things to understand about stress. Well, I could just let the air out of this balloon. And if I did, that even scared me.
There we are.
Right. If I have many more balloons. Yeah. If I'd have let the air out of the balloon, think how wasted our apprehension, our anticipation, our anxiety would have been. How many people ruin the moments of their life anticipating awful things that never happen? A lot of our stress, people, comes from that. Now, if you can do something about your life, do it. But if you're just ruining the quality of your life because you're anticipating something awful might happen, that's not a good thing. That's one of the most common problems we have with stress. Anticipation, this ability that humans have to anticipate things. The ability that we have to recollect things, to remember things. And a lot of our life is influenced by our memories and our anticipations. We need to learn to manage those things. So often when we talk about stress, the concern seems to be about the quantity of our life. You'll live longer. What I would like to emphasize is the quality of life. Do things that improve the quality of the moments of your life. You live your life in these little moments, these little pieces of experience that are moments. Improve the quality of the moments of your life. Do the things that you can do. Don't get stressed out. Don't destroy or contaminate or pollute the quality of your life by things that you can't do anything about. So again, that brings us to the point of managing stress. Learning to do those things that help us to manage the stress in our life. I'll use a little girl balloon this time.
What was the red one?
I don't know. Sometimes the balloon, as I motivate it, stress it, sometimes it will pop when I'm adding more air, more pressure, more stress. There's a saying I'm sure you've heard, I can't take any more. I just can't take any more. Now that's not what this balloon told us. What did this balloon say? I can't take it any longer. See, there's a difference between I can't take any more and I can't take it any longer. We have to recognize both of those things and try to include that in the management of our life. This balloon popped when I was just holding it. I wasn't adding any more pressure. It just couldn't take it any longer. But often they pop when I'm adding more pressure. They can't take any more. And we don't want to get to the point where we come apart. Often when we do, we make a lot of noise too, don't we? See? We make a lot of noise when we get to that point. Now, another lesson. We may be managing the stress in our life. That doesn't mean that something can't come along, like this big pin, and create problems for us. What's going to happen to this balloon when I poke this pin in it? Well, actually, it won't pop. See? I didn't pop it. I injured it, but I didn't pop it. Why? Why? Doesn't have enough pressure? Well, that certainly makes a big difference, but that's not the right answer this time. It has to do with where you poke the balloon. Whoops. The balloons have strong places and they have weak places. And so do you. See? You've got to understand where your strengths are, where your weaknesses are. Some people are emotionally very strong. Some people are not. Some people are physically very strong. Some people aren't. Some people are mentally very strong. Other people are not. Where are our strengths? Where are our weaknesses? Where are we vulnerable? What do we do to protect ourselves? To inoculate ourselves? Again, a lot of what we have to do to manage stress comes down to what we have to do individually. And what one person has to do may be different in some ways from what another person has to do. We want to individualize it so that it works the best for us. It's the most functional for us. Let me go on and do something else obnoxious. This is a smoke alarm. And it makes an obnoxious noise. And of course, there's a reason for that. Think about it. I'll give you one wish right now. Did you hear me?
Yeah, I'd like to destroy it.
What?
I'd like to destroy it.
Okay, what do you want me to do?
To not push that button anymore.
Oh, okay. Took a while. I just offered her one wish. I said, I'll give you one wish right now. Have you ever wished that somebody would give you one wish? Like a genie or something like that? Are you feeling any regrets at all? You wasted your one wish, in my opinion. I've got a briefcase full of money. I've got a brand new car out there I would have given you. A life of health and happiness. Think of all the things that you wasted just to turn off this obnoxious noise. Now think about that, people. Think about that. Think how foolish it would be for someone awakened in the middle of the night by their smoke alarm to see them fight their way through the smoke and the flames to the alarm Like if I could just turn that alarm off, my house wouldn't burn up. Is the alarm the problem? Let's put it in a little different context. Your automobile, you've got a brand new automobile that unfortunately you didn't wish, well, fortunately for me, you didn't wish for it. The check engine light comes on. You pull into a mechanic and say, please disconnect that light. See? Is the light your problem? Is the alarm your problem? See, there's a sequence of events that occur when we experience stress. The first one I've already mentioned. It's called adjustment. We just call on what we learn, we try to adjust, we try to make the best of the situation, we just adjust. If that doesn't work, actually we kick into a second level of response. We call it a reflex. We call it the fight or flight reflex. Think of that. It's mediated by a part of your nervous system called the autonomic nervous system. Let me just give you a little example. Suppose it's beautiful weather, you decide to take a picnic and go on the mountain. And you're enjoying your picnic. You have to eat, you have to digest, you have to assimilate, you have to metabolize, you have to detoxify, you have to eliminate waste. These are things that maintain your life for a long period of time. But suppose you're there having your picnic, you notice some movement over in the bushes, you look and there's a great big bear. Now the bear has to eat too. See? And it's heading for you. What do you have to do to preserve your life? You have to outrun someone. See? You don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun somebody else. See? So take me. When you go. Now think of the changes that occur in you. What's necessary for you to finish your potato salad isn't what's necessary for you to survive an attack by a bear. And you change. You have, kind of like a fancy car, an automatic transmission. You will shift into a lower gear. It's controlled by the autonomic nervous system. The long-term functions are controlled by the parasympathetic division. The short-term fight or flight reflex is a switch to the sympathetic division of that nervous system. And you start doing things you haven't been doing, and you stop doing things you've been doing. One of the things is secreting saliva. You've got to secrete saliva to get your picnic down and not choke to death. But if a bear's after you, what good is it going to do to secrete saliva? You're going to spit on it? See? So you stop doing some things, you start doing other things. You're prepared to either run or fight. That's why it's called the fight or flight reflex. And it's mediated by lots of different chemicals. One of them is adrenaline. Think of what happens if we live there. Some people become addicted to adrenaline. And they just try to keep this adrenaline high going all the time. What would happen to your car if you shifted it into first gear because it's so responsive and went 85 miles an hour? Well, 80 miles an hour with your transmission in first gear. What's going to happen? Well, it's going to come apart at the weakest place. You're going to burn your engine, your transmission, something's going to go out if you drive 80 miles an hour down the freeway with your transmission in first gear, and the same thing will happen to you if you go down the freeway of your life with your automatic transmission in first gear and you're trying to go 80 miles an hour. We have to learn to manage stress. The next reaction is pain. We start hurting. If adjusting, fighting, running doesn't hurt, that's when the alarm goes off. And in humans, the alarm is some variation of pain. Maybe guilt, remorse, it's painful. Maybe physical pain. A lot of us have an alarm right there in our head. We call it headache. Now, what do you do when you have a headache? You go in to the mechanic and say, please disconnect the light. If you have headaches, you probably have a problem. Your headache isn't it. The headache is the alarm that tells you that you have a problem. Now, it may be functional to take something to relieve the headache so that you're more able to figure out what your problem is and deal with it. But pain is the alarm system. That's what motivates us to stop doing things that are dangerous and maybe start doing things that are much more functional. Pretty important idea. Now there's one final reflex, and that is what we call the quieting reflex. Because if all these other things fail, what you do biologically, what you're programmed to do biologically, is shut down. You'll shut down. That's mediated by chemistry as well. And one of those chemicals is very similar to morphine. In fact, it was called endogenous morphine. We've shortened the term now to endorphin. So we produce chemicals that reduce our pain, create euphoria, quiet us down. Think of the things that people do to get their fix of natural morphine. We call it runner's high, for example. And what do you have to do to get your high if you're a runner? Well, you have to go through all these other stages, including the pain. You have to hit the wall and get through that to get your high, if that's what your drug of choice happens to be, is endorphin. It's a mechanism, people, that we have to understand. It's part of what we have to learn to manage. And research in fairly recent years by Martin Seligman and Stephen Mayer and others have shown how if we have endorphins along with a bad attitude, it's called learned helplessness, somehow our immune response is suppressed, and that makes us more susceptible to pathogens and carcinogens. So it's important for us to understand we do the things we do because of an interaction of biological factors and psychological factors. And if we understand a lot of this, we're in a much better position to manage our own life. Now, Renee indicated I've talked to you about the difference where depression is involved. Well, there are different kinds of depression. Different kinds of depression. And we don't differentiate. Right now, we think that all depression is abnormal body chemistry. It's a lack of Prozac. Your body's not producing enough Prozac. So just supplement the Prozac, you won't be depressed anymore. Well, some people need Prozac. A lot of depressed people don't. Some depressed people simply need to learn not to be depressed. They need to learn to put something in place of their depression. They need to learn to go out in the sunlight in the morning. They need to learn to get a good night's sleep. They need to learn to exercise. They need to learn to eat right. They need to learn to manage things that they can manage and solve problems they can solve and not be overcome by things they can't do anything about. We need to individualize. There are important principles, but we need to customize our life when it comes to managing stress. Well, I'm about to the point, I guess, where if you have any questions or anything, I would be happy to respond to them. I know there are lots of other important things, people, that you need to do, but.
Would you just repeat how you got into the learned helplessness?
Yeah.
You approach that differently than I've heard before. Could you just repeat that?
what happens in learned helplessness is that you find yourself in situations and you can't solve the problem, but you're still stressed. And what really happens there is that when you give up, then somebody else solves the problem. That reinforces you for giving up. So you learn that you're helpless. You learn that there's no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no silver lining to the cloud. See? You become pessimistic. You don't have any optimism in your life. And so when you are subjected to pain, and if you have the habit of beating up on yourself or having other people beat up on you so you can get your endorphin fix, those endorphins together with this attitude called learned helplessness suppresses your immune response, and that's the connection. Martin Seligman has suggested that it's a mechanism in evolution. Just for example, in a few weeks, the mule deer that we see occasionally will start battling. The bucks will start fighting each other. Well, some of them will lose. And they'll lose again, and they'll lose again. And that will suppress their immune response. So that if there is an infection, they'll be more susceptible to that infection. That will get them out of the gene pool. So it's a mechanism that operates biologically, psychologically. Again, it's an interaction. There's a book that you might be interested in, written by Martin Seligman. It's called Learned Optimism. And so he talks about how you can go from being pessimistic, you can go from having learned helplessness to learning to be optimistic, learning to take control of your life and be empowered in your life. Yes?
Well, I just want to comment two things. You said that somehow stress has become part of lives, but I have witnessed people who are stress-free and who have a good life without stress. So I think that somehow we have naturalized the idea of stress as part of our lives, but actually it's really abnormal because it has really harsh consequences in people's health.
Okay.
But somehow, because of lifestyles, we just say that it's normal, and I don't think that's normal. It's just we adopted or accepted the idea as normal. It is not, because it is possible to live a life without stress. And I have seen people in that
Do that. Well, I would agree with you if what we are talking about is what Selye calls distress, the destructive stress. We do need to learn to live our lives with little or no destructive stress. But then there's the good stress that is, anticipation of wonderful things, joy. See, all of that really involves stress. It's motivation to do things. It's wanting to achieve something. See, that's pressure, but it isn't negative and it isn't destructive. So I think what you're suggesting is very important. There are people who live lives that I would call, using Selye's words, distress-free lives, but not stress-free if we talk about eustress or good stress. Mm-hmm.
The second thing that I want to comment is that you mentioned that somehow some people need some pressure to develop their core values. But I think there's other ways to do that. Like, for example, if you are aware, you create awareness in your life, you have the consciousness, you don't need the pressure. You can, for example, learn that you need to do exercise because you know that it's good for your health, that you feel better, and not because you have high blood pressure or you have diabetes. It is just the self-awareness. And I think you can develop that idea through meditation or through just different ways. For some people, maybe pressure would be a good way to push them, but for others, they can develop other ways.
But what happens to the person that feels like this is what they want to do if they don't do it? Then they feel guilt, then they feel pressure. So the way they get to a healthy life is to understand what a healthy life is, to understand what they have to do to be healthy, but they do it to avoid the stress that will occur if they don't do it. See, so we have, again, lots of different motives, lots of answers to the question, why do we do the things we do? I really agree with you that we need to learn to manage stress and we need to eliminate destructive stress, distress. But I think even when it comes to adjusting our breathing, it's stress that makes us balance the carbon dioxide in our blood. See, we misunderstand that. We think we breathe when we lack oxygen. We don't breathe when we lack oxygen. We breathe when we have a buildup of carbon dioxide. It pushes us, it motivates us to breathe, because if we don't, then the effect is going to be destructive. So, we're just sort of, I think, disagreeing a little bit on semantics, but certainly not on the goal or the principle or the value of emphasizing a healthy life for positive reasons. Appreciate that very much. Thank you. Yes, it's done.
How do we balance the short-term stress in order to get long-term goals? I know I need to get in shape, and I'm feeling bad right now, so I eat a candy bar. And that takes care of my short-term stress rather than taking care of my longer-term.
Yeah. Well, one way, of course, is to understand the process involved, because that gives you often the advantage of choice. You're choosing. So if you've got money to buy a new car, and there's a car you really like and a car that you like but not nearly as well, which car are you going to buy? Well, see, if you really understand what we call motivation and what's called the approach gradient, you understand that you may settle for the car you don't like as well because you can drive it off the lot today. If you have to wait for 6 weeks to get delivery of the car you really like, you may settle for something less because you can have it now. That's the basis for so many of the problems we have in our personal lives and even beyond that in our communities and in our nation. It's a major thing in our economy. We want things now. We don't care how much interest we have to pay in the future. We want it now. And so just understanding this dynamic, this gradient. I talked about the students who put off studying because they're on an avoidance gradient, compared to students who study early, they're on an approach gradient. The closer I got to you with the balloon, the more motivated you were to try to adjust somehow. I see people from time to time that do really smart things when I get close. They put their fingers in their ears. The other people just take it, just take it. See, figure out how to deal with the problems in your life and deal with them. See? Great question. Well, anything else? Yes.
Just one more question. Selye, is that the same person that wrote the book Learning Optimism? Is that?
No.
Okay, you said
No.
Solomon?
Hans Selye is sort of the guy that came up with a lot of the original stuff on stress. His work is referred to as the general adaptation syndrome. The other fellow that did the work on learned helplessness and wrote the book Learned Optimism, his name is Seligman. 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 Martin Seligman.
Okay, so what would be, if you wanted to read more about this, was that the book you would say to read?
It's a pretty good book.
What about, I remember having a book way back when called Feeling Good. I loaned it out, lost it, and I wonder about whether getting it again by David Burns. Kind of the same
Yeah.
cognitive therapy. What do you recommend reading?
Well, I don't.
Okay.
No, I don't recommend reading at all. No, I recommend reading if it stimulates thinking.
Well, yeah.
Okay? And that's what I'm suggesting. We need to ponder, we need to think, we need to figure out what we need to do. See? And there are lots of bags of tricks. To me, there's a difference between having a bag of tricks and a box of tools. What I want is a box of tools that I can use in a constructive way. And books can give you tools. But we have a lot of the tools that we need. We don't use them. We don't master them. And so I think a lot of what we need to do is actually spend more time doing things that look to other people like a waste of time. I have that problem with my wife. Yeah. Yes.
I like how you finished with the idea of the bag of tricks versus the box of tools, because I think so many times we are looking for a quick fix to stress management, because so much it's become a cliche almost. You know, are you
Yeah.
stressed? And stress management, and we've been programmed to think it's a weakness in us.
Yes.
But actually, I mean, I know that I've gone through. It takes work. You know,
Yeah.
it takes work. It takes cognitive restructuring, which maybe we can have another presentation on. It's
Yeah.
a very real thing that you can
Yeah.
do. But the positive message is that we really do have the power within us.
Yeah. But see, cognitive restructuring is changing the way we think. And we may think that we feel the way we feel because we think the way we think. They're separate domains of human experience. They occur together. See? If our thoughts caused our behaviors, then we would always do what we know we should do, and we don't. See? Our feelings don't cause our actions. That's a superstition. Your feelings don't cause your actions. We have people that we pay a lot of money to entertain us because they can convince us by their actions that they feel certain ways. In education, we differentiate what they call the affective, psychomotor, and cognitive domains. And that's what I call feelings and actions and thoughts. These are different domains of human experience. And the whole of an experience may be more than the sum of the parts, but they're different parts. So we have to learn that our emotional life is controlled by, it's mediated by chemicals, the endocrine system. The physical part is different. The mental part or cognitive part is different. And we need harmony, see? But sometimes what we need to change is the way we think. Sometimes all we need to change is the way we act. We don't need to change the way we think. Sometimes we need to change the way we feel. See? And it's realizing that we've learned to do these things and we can learn not to. That I think is the key. But having the tools to do that, and your idea of a quick fix, and of course that ties right in to the religion of our day and age, which is chemistry. We think that chemicals cause our problems. We think that chemicals will solve our problems. I mean, look at how big a problem drugs are in our society. But we've got to realize that we produce drugs, like natural morphine. And if we get hooked on that, we'll do all kinds of very destructive things to get our fix. And some people that think they're being really healthy are not being really healthy. I remember seeing a documentary of a man that was being celebrated because he would run a marathon race every week. And in the interview, he revealed he didn't know where his family was. His wife had divorced him. He was an addict. He was addicted. Nothing mattered in his life but getting his fix of endorphins. And he got them by running all the time. Now that isn't a healthy life. It may be healthy to run, but it isn't healthy to have to run all the time. That's the difference. Well, thank you for the opportunity.